Welcome back to Freedom Unfolding. We are an inclusive, holistic community that offers education, options, and inspiration to find your truth, find your voice, and find your freedom. And I will be your host today. I'm Jillian. I'm owner of Elemental Healing and Coaching, and I am a mother, a wife, and a lover of life who is a clinical hypnotherapist, empowerment coach, trauma specialist, and best-selling author. And I specialize in trauma-informed root work that allows the innate intelligence of the subconscious to lead the way, helping to turn struggle into stillness and serenity. And I'm so excited to be here with you today, and we will be discussing a topic that is particularly relevant always from the beginning of time, and in particular now especially. And what that topic is stress. And this can be daily stress. It can be stress as it presents in various ways. And we'll be discussing how easily a stress cycle or an activation can turn into trauma, whether that's little t trauma or big T traumas. And we'll be going a little more into what that is. And also the episode will speak a little more to the subconscious impacts of that activation. And we'll dive a little deeper into emotional regulation. And as always, I will be providing you a tool, just as our community here at Freedom Unfolding is very committed to do in every podcast. We will be providing tools that will help to walk listeners through whatever it is that we are covering. And today we'll be walking you through that activation cycle, what you can do when you have a stress activation. And I'll go ahead and post. I have an infographic that we'll be going through a protocol that I like to work on with my clients, and I will post that infographic on our social media so that you have access to that if you're somebody that likes to see those things, or if you want to download it on your phone. So without further ado, let's just kind of jump into this. And I want to start by before I kind of intro what the stress and activation cycle is, which probably a lot of us are familiar with this topic, I just want to mention, when we are talking about things that might be, emotionally charged, or that might be a trigger for us, I just want to leave you with the invitation today to really start with, if you're going to bring something to mind to work through, to really start with something that might be a little less activating. That's, not the most activating thing that you can think of, or the most stressful topic that you've experienced. Just perhaps go over, when you were, triggered by being, maybe cut off in traffic, or, a look that you got, or something along those lines. Just something small that, certainly is relevant and certainly can be triggering. But it's helpful to kind of start in that space, and that will allow our nervous system to kind of gain that awareness to be able to work through it when there are bigger, more activating triggers and stressful experiences. So with that, let's just talk a little bit about the stress and activation cycle. And just, in order to talk about the stress and activation cycle, there's really a benefit to understanding what's going on in our bodies when we are activated. So if you think about, for instance, maybe getting, having somebody look at you while you're in public, and you and you kind of feel that sense of like worry about judgment in some way or another, that is a stress activation. And what happens when we are activated, whether it's something smaller like that, or whether we actually almost, get in a car accident, or experience something, that can be even more life-threatening, what happens is that we get a dump of hormones that kind of help us to actually go into fight, flight, or freeze. And, there's the adrenaline and the cortisol that gets released in order to prepare our bodies to be able to fight or flight or to freeze. And, or to be able to fight or flight. And freeze kind of comes later typically. And so with that, let's say with the activation, what goes on is that as soon as we're activated, we have that heightened sense of awareness. There's more energy in our system, and we become hyper aware of whatever it is that we're feeling threatened by in some way or another. So if that's, you got to look and you're feeling a little bit unsure if there's a judgment behind it and that feels threatening to you, that might obviously, create those feelings of activation. And in that can be very different for people depending on a whole host of factors. It can depend on the way that you're brought up, how it's presenting in the situation. But either way, it always comes down to, a sense of either wanting to fight or to flee or flight, to fight or flight. And also called flee, of course. And so with that, if you take this for example, and that might look a lot of ways, you might be saying to yourself, just because somebody looks at me a certain way, I'm not wanting to run away, or I'm not wanting to, go and fight the person. But it can, fight can look in a lot of different ways. So it can have this sense of, a lot of the time with it comes like a sensation and maybe some meaning that is made from that sensation. So it might be that person is judging me, and who are they to judge me? Or it might be that person might be judging me and they're probably right. Or it could be a whole host of other things. And with that, often there might be a sense of wanting to say something and speak up for yourself, and maybe you have the sense of wanting to yell and you're angry. Or there might be a sense of real fear that is causing you to want to not be seen and to escape and just go somewhere else. Maybe if we're in the store, we want to go and hide or leave the store or go in the next aisle, or perhaps we want to be, there's a sense, whether we would do it ever or not, but there's a sense of maybe wanting to imagine yelling at the person, or however that might look. And it can show up in so many different ways. And I just want to be clear that this is a very human response, that in some way or another, when we are experiencing a stress activation, this will show up. And we might get a sense of wanting to, shake somebody, or wanting to fight or stomp or scream or whatever that is. But in some way, that's a fight or a flight. And also, if there's a perceived threat to the level of not being able to fight or flight, then sometimes we have this sense of freezing, and you might hear about people just getting locked up, and they didn't know what to say, they didn't know what to do, and they were confused, and they weren't really thinking anything. And that usually happens when we've our system is shut down, because it has a perceived idea that it's not going to be able to escape, and it's not going to be able to fight its way out. And this can even happen if there's, for instance, like confrontation in families sometime. If you really feel like you're not able to speak up and you're not able to get away, you might just go into that complete shutdown, where you just kind of check out, and you don't even really remember what was said. You don't remember what was done. You didn't feel like you had agency over your body in the moment. And that's that state of shutdown or freeze. And so there's these different ways that it shows up. And when that's going on, that nervous system is activated, and it's kind of sent all of that energy into you so that you can fight to survive, or so that you can flee to survive. And what happens is that when we get that activation state out, ideally, we return then to, our baseline goes back to normal. The system, if it feels like it's had completion and the need was met, then it goes back to that normal level baseline. We balance out, we move on with our lives. That's ideal. Now, what often happens is that the need was not met. So in society today, we can't always fight our way out of something, and we can't always flee our way out of something. So if somebody gives us a look and we feel like they're judging us, there might be all kinds of things going on and sensations in our system, and we might be feeling like, we want to go yell at the person, and that didn't happen because we know, hey, I'm in a grocery store and I have no idea what's really going on. So we might be kind of aware of that a little bit logically, and maybe we're overriding that sense of fight or flight with our logical brain. And to speak on the brain, what's going on in the system is when there's a fight, flight, or flee that's activated, when that nervous system response is activated, that stress response, that is activated, and it's happening in the part of the brain that is called the reptilian brain. And this is the strictly survival brain. That's where we started. We needed that in order to survive, and we need that now, in some situations. And it's very helpful, and we can, elevate from there. There's also the emotional brain, the emotional part of the brain. And of course, there's the logical part of the brain. And as humans, we tend to have a little bit of all of that as we're experiencing that activation. So there might be emotions of sadness or of anger or of frustration that happens with that. And then from there, we might be, trying to make meaning about things, and deciphering whether we need to actually go ahead and activate our fight or flight and actually, take part in that, or if we can kind of override and say, hey, I'm not actually sure I'm being judged right here, and that would cause an even bigger scene, and whatever that might be, that you can kind of talk yourself out of that with your logical brain. Now, the difficult thing is that if you had, and there's various levels, right? So you can be partially activated, and you can be activated up into the point, if your life has ever actually been in danger, you don't have much logical thought going on. You're just acting. You're just acting strictly from the fight or flight or freeze, that reptilian survival brain. Now, what happens is when we override that with our logical brain, when we can kind of set that aside and or if we've got frozen in it, so if we were not able to fight or flight, and if the need was not met, if that energetic charge did not complete in our system, what can happen is that it gets kind of stuck. It can be kind of cycling in activation, or it can also go dormant if the system's too overwhelmed and it feels like the system, the body can't handle that activation. Then it might go into complete shutdown mode, and that's where, disassociation is experienced, or that sense of, being kind of detached from your body, or really up in the clouds, or it's like if you've had a traumatic situation happen, that being disassociated. And so we can experience that even with tiny activations. So even if we just thought we got a dirty look in the store, we can experience all these things. And let's say that we complete our shopping trip and we finish, and that feeling that we had about being judged stays with us. So if that's the case, that means that the need was not met. That means we didn't get that energetic charge. We didn't complete the stress cycle in order to dispel it from our bodies. And a lot of the time that might look like actually running or hitting our feet on the ground, or if we felt like if there was a sensation that we needed to yell, it might look like just getting in the car and rolling up the windows and screaming, or singing at the top of your lungs, or whatever that might be. And this is why running can be so incredibly helpful for the nervous system and for stress relief, because our system actually gets the sense that it is getting that running activation out. And so it can be incredibly beneficial. And so let's say that you did not get that out in the store, and you get into the car and you still have that with you. And you're still thinking through as you go on about your day, and you continue to kind of draw back on what must have they been thinking, and then you start to make meaning out of it. They must have been judging me because of this or that, and who are they? And, we've all probably been down some type of road like this in some way or another, whether it had to do with somebody else cutting us off while driving, or somebody giving us a look, or whatever, an argument with a friend or a family member or stranger, whatever that might look like, where you just kind of keep cycling back to it and trying to make meaning from it. When that happens, it's simply that your system felt like the need was not met, and it's trying to get the need met. So it's playing it over and over. And this is really important here. So when that happens, and when you're returning to a scene over and over, and that means that the need was not met, what goes on is that there's a decision that is made when that need was not met, subconsciously. And subconsciously speaking, the subconscious is really just kind of trying to film what went on and help us stay alive. And so subconsciously, if that need was not met, if it feels as if it's looping and you're just going through that over and over again, it's going to try to make some decision. It's going to try to make meaning of it to try to keep you from experiencing that again. And what that might look like can look so different from anybody, but I'll give you, or depending on who you are, but I'll give you some examples. So it might look like you have decided that you're not going to make eye contact with anybody. That all of a sudden you find that you're just really focused on what you're going to get at the grocery store, and you're not looking up to make eye contact with anybody. You're just really focused on what you get, because when you made connection that time, it felt uncomfortable and it felt unsafe. It could look like, you start just automatically, scowling at other people, because at least if you kind of keep yourself cut off from that, then nobody else can hurt you. These aren't always conscious decisions, by the way. So often they're not, and it can just look like that's what we're doing, and maybe sometimes we realize it and sometimes we don't. It could be that you kind of develop a panic around the store. If this has happened, and it's really imprinted in your subconscious, or if it's happened time and time again. And it can be to the point where you get panic attacks when you have to go in the store, or that you avoid it altogether. And so there's a lot of different ways these things can play out, and that's all simply from that activation not getting completion in the nervous system, and from the subconscious trying to make a decision to keep you safe going forward. Now, that being said, and I also kind of want to touch real quick before I go further, just on what's going on when we return back in our imagination and we're remembering how something went. When we are picturing something in our mind's eye, whether that be a memory, whether that be an imagination, whether that be trying to picture how something will go in the future. What they found with brain scans that's really fascinating is that all the same areas of the brain light up when you're imagining something clearly in your mind's eye as when you are experiencing it and seeing with your own eyes. And this has incredible implications, and this is why I'm so incredibly passionate about hypnotherapy, and why hypnotherapy is so incredibly impactful and effective in such a short amount of time often. And it's because if you can perceive it, in a sense, you can believe it, but you have to really perceive it. It has to be, believable for your system. And so what's really interesting is that if you've already had that movie kind of implanted in your brain that did happen in real life, when you go back and you remember it, you're activating your stress responses over and over every time you imagine it again. So as far as your system's concerned, you're back in fight or flight or freeze. You're experiencing that over and over, and it is incredibly taxing on the body. And so what's really important to remember is that if you can get that system, and we'll talk about the tool and how to do this, but if you can honor the charge, if you can get that out of your body, out of your system, and feel like the need is met, then that's not going to happen. And what's really wonderful is that we can use our imagination to help us with that. We can use it to help get that charge out, to maybe imagine the situation how we would have liked to experience it if we did come out of the experience, feeling whole and complete in that experience. And so let's just think about that. Let's just think about that little, some little activating experience that you've had that's not, not too triggering. And just kind of, remember it. Whatever's up for you, right? Whatever comes to you first is just fine. But let's think about that and just understanding that the need wasn't met, that is where that trauma starts, is where the need is not met, and where there's a decision with the subconscious that it's going to do something to try to avoid that going forward, or to try to keep that from happening, to keep you safe. And that can actually be, you do start snapping at people every time they look at you. It might look a whole host of different ways again. And that then would be more of a little t trauma. Now, a big T trauma would be things, like PTSD. They literally redirect your entire life. There's a whole host of things around PTSD, and I won't go too into that. That's more of the big T trauma. But what a lot of people, just in society, there's kind of a lack of sharing and awareness in general, or at least there has been. There's starting to become more and more information available, but there has been this lack of awareness on this topic and what trauma really is, and the fact that really just about all of us have trauma. About all of us have experienced trauma. Anytime there's really a maladaptive behavior, an unhelpful behavior, there tends to be some type of trauma around that. It might just be that little T trauma, but really the fact of the matter is that there is a need that was not met at some point, and so the subconscious tried to make a decision to avoid that going forward to help you be safe. And so let's take that and let's kind of be with that for a minute, and be aware of, what subconscious decision that you might have made from that little experience that you've been kind of returning to just recently, or that you're returning to now in your awareness, and try to just become aware for a moment. What was your sense that you wanted to do, that you felt needed to happen from that experience? Did you feel like there was a flight sensation, a wanting to leave or hide or escape? just not be there anymore, be somewhere else? Was there a sense of wanting to, go and step in and, make something happen, whether it be physically or with your voice? I know this can be really common. I'll speak as a parent. This is so common. This happens probably daily with most parents, at least here in the U.S., especially during this, season with all the, changes and shifts here in 2020. And so, we're already, our systems are a little flooded already. And if something happens that triggers us with our children, there might be a sense of like, I just need some time to myself, that you're wanting to, a sense of wanting to yell, or a sense of just wanting to avoid it and escape it. Or, there might be a sense of like, I just want to shake my kid because they're not understanding me. And I just want to be clear here. I'm not advocating that at all. That's not the helpful way to deal with things. I would say ever, not in a situation I can think of. But I also want to be clear that that is a human tendency to want to yell, to want to shake, to want to hit, to want to run away, to want to escape, to want to just not be seen. These are all part of the reptilian brain. Everybody experiences them on some level. So you don't need to feel shame or guilt over your sensations. Shame or guilt over your sensations are not going to be helpful. When we try to avoid that, that is where it gets worse. Now, what you can do is recognize, what is that and what is the need behind it? And so if you had the sense of wanting to yell or shake, that's your fight sense, right? If you had the sense of just wanting to escape or run away, go into a different room, that's more of the flight sense. And if you're returning to that over and over, and you're thinking about at the end of the day, how that happened with your child, or how that happened at the store, and you seem to be going through that in your mind, the invitation is to be with that, to be aware of it, to understand what the need is, and understand that need just didn't get met. And when we understand the need that didn't get met, we can do something about it to meet that need so that it doesn't continue cycling in our system. And it's from the avoidance, from the trying to avoid it, the trying to tuck it away, the trying to suppress it, the trying to, bury it deeper down, that the trauma really happens, whether that's a little T or a big T trauma. And the more we suppress and avoid, the more the chance is likely for it to turn from a little T trauma to a big T trauma. And, I like to say that ignoring it can really lead to that definition of insanity, that doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. The more we try to push it down, and the more we expect things to be different, the more we feel like there's that sense of insanity that we're experiencing. And what really needs to happen is not to avoid it or to try to, get around it, or, or not experience it, but to just go through it, to honor it, to be with it, to spend a little time with it, with intention. And here, is where that tool comes in. And to speak to that, just before I kind of go into it, the tool, I call it rate to regulate. And I just want to kind of, invite you to know that with this tool, it's really helpful to just be with the awareness. So this you can use in the moment if you are able to have that sense of agency and able to kind of bring in or invoke your logical mind to help you out. But sometimes we just don't have that. And what's really going on is the reptilian brain, our sense of fight or flight is in full control of us, and that's okay. You can be with yourself afterwards with that. So you can use this tool afterwards. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about this tool. So, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to invite you, if you're willing and if it feels comfortable, to just kind of think about this a little bit. And maybe you have this thing in mind that you've been working with, and just allow yourself to kind of be gentle with it. And often, if you're not sure what the answer is, this is more about your body, your sensations, what feels true to you. And in almost every circumstance, the very first awareness that you have, whether that be see, sense, feel, imagine, hear, whatever that is, that usually is probably the truest answer when you're kind of when you're moving through something like this, because it is very in tune with our bodies and our sensations and our subconscious, and it doesn't always make conscious sense what might be up for us, okay? So, rate to regulate. Let's talk a little bit about this. So the first step is to recognize. So when I say recognize, I'm talking about recognizing what that activation is. And the first step in recognizing is that just recognizing there's a charge. And ideally, if you can rate it, so on a scale of 1 to 10, you ask yourself, where am I? If 10 was the most I've ever been activated, it's the most charged I've ever felt, where am I on a scale from 1 to 10? And ideally, if we can be with something that keeps us at a lower charge, for the purpose of this, that's more helpful, just at least to begin with. So, and this can be, after a close call with driving, after a look in public somewhere. It can be just feeling agitated with a friend or a family member. But if you're not feeling calm, the stress cycle has been activated, and it may be looping. And so this can be considered almost like a seed in navigating towards completing a stress cycle in order to discharge that activation, which is the, kind of the end goal, to be able to move through it so it can be discharged. And on the infographic that I talked to you about, I have this kind of paired with like almost the life cycle of a butterfly. And so starting with the seed and going into the caterpillar and the chrysalis and up to the butterfly. So if you kind of think about it, this is the seed of starting to navigate, to work towards that completion in the stress cycle so that you're able to discharge it. So you just kind of recognize, okay, there is a need here. I'm having this activation, and I'm going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And just noticing I'm not calm, I'm stressed, I'm activated. And from there, going with the A and rate, and that A is awareness. And when I say awareness, I'm talking about having awareness of sensations. And that's the second step that can be likened to the caterpillar. So that second step of having awareness of what sensations are showing up in my body. For example, is there tension in your shoulders or in your chest? Are you holding your hands in a fist? Is there maybe some knots in your gut? Do your feet feel like they need to run? Does your voice feel like there's some type of concentration in your throat or jaw? This can be considered, again, the caterpillar portion of this, as you kind of inch through or navigate the stress cycle and that nervous system activation that you experience with stress. And this is where you kind of, begin to have awareness. Is there a fight? a flight or flee or a freeze going on here. And the next step then is to track. So the T, R-A-T, of rate. And with this tracking, you're really talking about, or I'm really talking about tracking it in the body. So understanding what, not only what that sense is that's showing up, but also what the need is. So we're tracking the body and the need. Tracking where the sensation is and what the need is key here. So when you think of terms in flight or fight, or some call it flee with flighting, is that tension in your chest or your hands or your gut or whatever that might be, is it making you want to punch or scream? That would be an example, of course, of fight. Is that charge in your legs or your gut making you want to get away, to flee or flight? And just noticing the emotions can even be helpful. Not necessary. They don't have to be necessary. This can be likened to the chrysalis stage, where you kind of go within. So you're going within and becoming aware. So we've started first with the seed and just recognizing that there's a charge and rating it. And then we have the awareness of the caterpillar that's kind of inching their way through and navigating what the stress cycle is, what the sensations are in the body, and then tracking those sensations in the body and understanding what the need is as we track them. We're going within to track those. And then the last step of rate to regulate is the E, and that expelling the energy. And when I talk about expelling the energy, we're talking about meeting the need. And with meeting the need, what you want to do is, the point, the intention is to get that charge, that activation out, to move through it, to experience the activation, and then to get it out of your body in whatever safe way resonated with you. That's tied to the fight or the flee or the flight. So, and I just want to touch on here, it is very important to really kind of titrate or pendulate yourself. And when I say that, in other words, the sensation, if it was to run away, you can start by slowly running and then going really, really fast to going hard, and then slowly starting to slow down little by little until you're walking and then you stop. Or if, let's say, you can't run, let's say you're at work and you got upset at a confrontation at work, you're sitting at your desk, it might be that you start to slowly tap your feet against the ground and that you build up and until you're at the height of it, and then you slowly build back down again. Or if the sensation is to scream, that you start out more quietly and then gradually work your way up and then back down again. And I often think of kind of like a bell curve with this, right? Like working up and then working down. And what this does is it meets or helps to meet the system's need in order to discharge the activation without over-processing it. And you can rate once this has happened. So once you feel like that's happened, then you want to rate the charge once more. Where am I at on a scale of 1 to 10? And let's just say you kind of started out somewhere like, 4 or 5, and you come down to, a 4 or 3. So you might want to move through the process again. And you can do that a few times. And again, this is likened, once you expel the energy, it's likened to, I like to liken to it to that sense of flying free. That now I have the agency to take flight from this activation, to get it out, to use it to propel me to higher heights. And, we might want to, again, if we feel like that's not quite enough, we might go through it again and start again with the rate to regulate. So you start with recognizing the activation and seeing where you're at on that scale of 1 to 10. Maybe you're at a 3, and you kind of understand that, I'm still agitated, and just recognizing what that is. And then having the awareness over what sensations you're having in your body. And it might show up totally different that second time, if there is a second time or a third time. So, or it might show up the same exact way, or it might show up the same way, but you might have a sense that there's different emotions tied to it than before, and that's okay. But just becoming aware of the sensations in your body and knowing, like, hey, I'm in a sense of like stress response here, and then tracking where it is in your body and what the need is. So not only am I feeling something in my system, but understanding what's going on and if it needs to be fight or flight, or again, flee if it's flight. So whatever resonates with you. And just noticing, like, what is the need here? Do I need to run? Do I need to scream? Do I need to, grab onto something and shake it? Do I need to, whatever that might be. And you can get creative with this. So sometimes I jump up and down over and over and kind of just let it feel like, that frustration's all leaving me, and it helps. And again, then of course, once you understand what it is, then that, that's the understanding, the going within, the chrysalis. And then of course there's the expelling the energy once again. So meeting that need, understanding that it's important to really kind of titrate that, to let it start out slow. Then you can go, let it build up and then build back down again. And meet the system's need to discharge that activation and really expel that energy, to meet the need to have that butterfly that's flying free from the activation. And once that happens, it just lets that space free up. And then we feel so much more present. So no longer are we back in the past where something happened or projecting our fear into the future. Now we're able to be present. And when we're present with our lives and we're living in the moment, it's so much easier to be in a sense of stillness, a sense of serenity, a sense of joy, of peace, of happiness, of excitement, whatever that might be. But it's really nice. And if we are using our imaginations to imagine something, then we can use it to help us to imagine something that's beneficial or the way that we would like to have it happen. And often you can kind of pair that even with this rate to regulate tool. So we might imagine, that we went over and that we had a conversation with somebody and that we told them, hey, I feel really judged when you look at me in that way. And I just want to be loved and accepted. And you just do what you need to do to feel whole and complete and like you handled it in a safe and resource way. And that might be that you were able to yell at them, or that you were able to do whatever you needed, right? In a safe way, in a way that was safe. We don't necessarily want to imagine hurting people, okay? But you can imagine taking out that hurting energy and aggression on something else, or the wanting to scream into the pillow and say what you need to say. And then understanding what needed to be met in the moment. So if it's with our kids, really what we usually want is just for them to know that we're trying to help them be happy, healthy adults, or to be safe in the world, or whatever that might be. It might be the, having a need to be heard because we're doing our best. It might be that, we want to be accepted when we're out in public. It might be if our life was literally threatened, if we're out and we almost got in a car accident, it might just be understanding that, that person wasn't paying attention because they were having a bad day, and that doesn't make it okay, but it also doesn't mean that they were targeting you. Whatever it is that you need, that's safe is perfectly fine. So just being able to really help yourself in that way to not only meet the need in the body and in the mind and in the system. And when that need is met, we are making entirely different subconscious decisions from that. No longer do we have that fear space or the phobia or the avoidance or the stress or the depression around that experience. Now that space is freed up, and it allows us to live from a space in that term and that regards in that situation, a space of freedom and ease and maybe joy or love or whatever that is for you. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I just kind of want to conclude by saying that, stress is a part of our daily lives. That although at times it can be natural to want to avoid discomfort, it can be human to do that. I think most of us have been there at some point or another, or even regularly. The true key to peace, though, to acceptance, to resiliency, is in working through it, to meeting that need, to honoring it, rather than trying to avoid it or, to push it down. And we can do this by using what we talked about today, by using that rate to regulate tool and recognizing the activation, having awareness of our sensations, tracking the body and understanding what the need is, and then expelling the energy to meet that need. And this allows us not only to open up space for using our imaginations in ways that can certainly be more helpful to our well-being rather than hurtful, but perhaps even more importantly, it allows us to have more calm and happiness and joy in our minds and in our bodies and our lives, which really lends itself to having more space to be present and content in our lives, to look forward to our future more, and being able to really shift that sense of struggle into more stillness and more serenity. So just in closing, I just want to say, of course, you can find this tool. It'll be posted on the social media accounts, or you can also email us. And I just want to thank you for being with me today. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us. For information and updates, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can email us also at freedomunfolding@gmail.com. And just thank you so much again for listening, and an invitation to join our community every Thursday. We typically try to post by 3:33 Arizona time. And knowing that here at Freedom Unfolding, this is where you can find your truth, find your voice, and find your freedom. This is Jillian with Freedom Unfolding.